Welcome to the podcast Artificial Art. My name is Steinar Jeffs. I'm a musician and a music teacher, and in this podcast I'll be interviewing guests about technology and creativity. So, hi and welcome, Philippe Pasquier. You are a professor at Simon Fraser University School of Interactive Arts and Technology, where you direct the Metacreation Lab for creative AI. You also lead a research creation program around generative systems for creative tasks. And as such, you're a scientist specialized in artificial intelligence, a software designer, multidisciplinary media artist, educator, and a community builder. Pursuing a multidisciplinary research creation program, your contribution bridge fundamental research on generative systems, machine learning, effective computing, and computer-assisted creativity, applied research in the creative software industry, and artistic practice in interactive and generative art. Does that sound about right?
Hello, Steinar. Yes, that sounds about right.
Excellent. And thank you so much for joining the podcast. I have a pretty broad question for you to start with. And that is, what is creativity and what does it mean for you?
Yeah, well, creativity is sort of a very trendy concept in our day and age. It has gained value, apparently, in every possible way in the last few years and decades. Since the rise of the individual, it has become an important value, sort of grown and made popular in our society through the lens of economical growth. There was this idea that the creative individual will be a more productive individual in our society, and it became a value. When it comes to defining it, that has been a challenge for the last 2,000 years, where philosophers all over the world have discussed the notion of creativity, and that's what in philosophy we call an essentially contested concept, meaning that there's no agreed upon definition really, and the debate is going on. And so at the Metacreation Lab for Creative AI, which I direct at Simon Fraser University, we take a very computer scientist approach to creativity because that's what we do. We sort of reduce it to the generativity of it. Often creativity is defined as the possibility to generate new ideas, new options, new items that are both original and valuable. But we try ourselves, instead of defining the concept of creativity and what are the creative process and how it works in human cognition, we reduce it to the notion of a creative task, which allows to capture the generative aspect of creativity. So I don't really talk about creativity in general. I often talk and look at creativity through the lens of, in the case of AI, of the partial or complete automation of a creative task. And so it doesn't really matter what it takes to, for example, compose a 4-part music with 4 tracks, but the task itself is clearly easy to define, and you know when you have achieved it. And so as a computer scientist, this sort of reducing creativity as a set of actions has been a very productive way to frame it, as opposed to getting into the muddy territory of debating the philosophy of the concept. Although that's really interesting too, but I'll keep it at that for now. So we talk about creative tasks, and creative tasks are in computer science, and for all intent and purposes, all of those tasks, and that's a lot, for which there's no rational optimal solution. So if I want to find the shortest path on a Google map, I will use A*. It's an algorithm that does that for you. And most people, they really follow the instruction of Google Map when they move. So what orients people in the world right now is this algorithm A*, and it's capable of finding the shortest path from A to B, given the driving conditions or given the state of the city and the streets. And that's an optimal solution. And so that's not a creative task. Playing chess, you win or you lose. It's a rational problem solving. So it's not a creative task. So that's under my definition, right, of creativity as a task. So the tasks that are creative are tasks that by definition, do not accept optimal solutions. So things like composing music, interpreting music, writing lyrics, everything that has to do with what you talk about usually and what your center is about, Steinhardt, it does fall under the idea of a creative task. Mastering a track is a creative task. There's no such thing as an optimal mastering or a Pareto dominant mastering or the utility function of a mastering, right? And so, jokes, choosing clothes in the morning, deciding the gaze we take when we look at something or the type of movement we make, all those things often do not have rational, optimal solutions, and therefore they're considered creative. So at the Metacreation Lab, that's really what we focus on: automatizing creative tasks for which there's no rational solution across domains. So we do it for dance and choreography, we do it for visual, for animation, but more importantly, we've been doing it in the last 15 years that the group has been together. We've been doing it intensively for music.
So if I got you right, creativity for you guys means creating something that doesn't have an optimal rational solution.
That's right.
I haven't actually heard that definition before. It was really interesting and really fits. It really fits well. A couple of other definitions on creativity I've found. For instance, like a stock version of creativity from Wikipedia says that creativity is the ability to form novel and valuable ideas or works using one's imagination. And of course, it gets to be a muddy territory when you talk about novel and valuable. I mean, who's the judge of what's novel or what's valuable? And I mean, something that's really hyped these days is, can a machine be creative? Can they create something new, or is it just regurgitating or imitating stuff that's made before? That discourse. And I recently read a post by an earlier podcast guest I've had on the show before. She's called Esther Fie Reinhardt. I don't know if you've heard about her, but she's made this definition that creativity is the decomposition of what is perceived, selection and recombination with the ability to compare an intermediate result with an inner theme, an emotion or idea. And the confrontation with the inner theme, in turn, requires the ability to feel emotions and a consciousness.
Aha. So more of a cognitive definition. Yeah, that's interesting. And, I could go that way, and there's plenty of attempt that way. And we do ourselves, when we do model creativity, we do look at what is the process, what are the cognition involved in terms of the belief, the desire, the intentions of an artificial agent. But I like my definition better because it is so functional, and it captures the first one from Wikipedia that you sort of read, which is also the one from Margaret Boden, which is maybe the most well-known philosopher of creativity in the 20th century. And her definition is exactly that it's about generating. So you produce something when you're being creative. There's an act of generation, an idea, an object, a painting, a piece of music. And then what you create needs to be original and valuable. And then there's different types of creativity. Personal creativity, peak creativity. Sometimes a kid makes a drawing. It is an act of creation, it is generative, it is novel, original, but is it valuable? Well, it's valuable for the kid. It may be valuable for the parents who are like, oh, now my kid can draw a house, right? But it's not valuable for the world. It's not going to go at Christie auction, right? So this valuability, how valuable it is, that's subjective. And of course, we all know that in art and when creativity is involved, there is subjectivity. Someone's creativity might rub me the right way, and someone else's creativity might rub me the wrong way. And so I'm not going to like all those creative artifacts the same way. And that's really that subjectivity that, for a computer scientist, for someone who works in AI, makes it more complicated than rational problem solving, more complicated than actually getting a self-driving car to go from A to B, taking the shortest path. And therefore a little bit more interesting I come from mathematics myself, and then I became a computer scientist as a way to do applied mathematics. And on the side, I've been growing a career as an artist. And so I've been fascinated by this very question of what is it that makes creativity different from pure rational problem solving? And at the beginning, of trying to identify creativity as different from rational problem solving, I had the idea that it meant, sort of by definition, that it would be really, really hard to get computer to be any good at any of those tasks. And it turns out, especially the last 10 years, after our efforts, but many other AI researchers, the whole field of generative AI with algorithms that specifically tackle those tasks for which there's no optimal solution has been booming, and now it's everywhere.
Mm. Let's get into the reason I found you in the first place, which was an article about a thing called MIDI-GPT. Could you tell us about what that is and why you have built it?
Right. So, yeah, we've been working at the Metacreation Lab for Creative on generative music system for a long time. Often those systems, and that's circle back to our previous conversation about definitions as well. Often those systems in machine learning and in AI have to do with training a model based on a set of data that we call the inspiration set or the training set. And then what those generative AI algorithms that we've been focusing on at the Metacreation Lab do is that they tend to try to imitate the data. And so they will generate new artifacts. So again, novel and potentially valuable artifacts, let's say pieces of music, in the case of MIDI-GPT, that would be classified by an unbiased observer, that is you and me, Steinhardt. If I do an evaluation study, they will be classified as belonging to the training set. In other words, the goal here is to pass a little test that is to compare what the system generates with what's in the training set. And if you can't make the difference, then it means my system is a good system. And that's really the tenet of any machine learning system, is to learn from data, the distribution of the data, in order to generate new elements that would be classified by an unbiased observer as belonging to the data set. And so we've been doing that since 2008 in the case of the Metacreation Lab. And then we went through all of the generation of different algorithm as machine learning as a field does progress, and as computing, which is the substrate, in which these machine learning algorithms work, is becoming more and more powerful. And as we accrue more and more data, then possibilities started increase. And back in 2018, and 2019 is when the first wave of transformers came through. And he appeared as an expert in the domain, someone who has been published in AI conferences since 2001. In my case, it was clear very quickly that this breed of model and approaches was better and stronger. And so everyone was flabbergasted by ChatGPT and the launch of AI agents and bots that we can talk to. And then it turns out that I knew from my upbringing in AI that language is just monophonic music in a way. It's a sequence of token. In music, we also have a temporal aspect of sequences of events, notes in general, in different tracks and instruments, but there is a vertical dimension that does not exist in language. In language, we do turn taking, but we don't talk at the same time together, especially not different sentences. And in music, there's this extra complexity of having horizontal dependencies and vertical dependencies. And so, as a researcher in AI, it seemed like there was a really good thing to try very quickly on, to try to apply this new architecture on musical data. We were not the first one. I mean, all of that happened in parallel in a way. We probably all have the same idea at the same time when the model came out. And I think one or two models, the model from Google, MusicNet, don't remember. There was one or two models that came out just before ours because they're really quick at releasing. Those big companies, they have engineers and PR people and all the mechanics to be the first one and make a big splash. But we were among the three first one in the world in applying this technology. And then, interestingly, the way we applied it was a little bit more powerful, more generic than others, and so the model has been sticking. And since 2019, I've been training basically MIDI-GPT transformers, but the paper just came out. So that's how much work it took, really. So the paper just came out at AAAI. At AAAI, the latest edition of AAAI, and been published with all the refinement that we did add, through those years. And during those years, we worked with that algorithm ourselves. We worked with companies to adapt that algorithm to their tool, and we trained, many versions of that algorithm. One of the things that we were really interested in that is new to our algorithm is how to control the generation, right? And so we've been doing a lot of work on that particular aspect. But to backtrack for a second, so MIDI-GPT is just a transformer, but instead of taking textual prompt, and there's a lot of text-to-music model out there, and there's nothing wrong with them. There's a debate whether they're more useful or less useful, but in our case, the prompt is made of music. It's made of existing MIDI music. And so MIDI-GPT is an infilling model that will basically generate whatever you want, and whatever you want will work. What it will generate will work with what's before, what's after, what's above, and what's under. So I can say, hey, this is a song, redo the bass line. Or, hey, this is a song, redo those 3 bars of the melody. Or, hey, this is a song, make me a continuation of those 4 tracks. Or, hey, this is a song, add a marimba track. And so what's nice with MIDI-GPT, it supports all the MIDI channels, and so all of the MIDI instruments are known by the system. It actually knows what range a bass is using. It generates parts that are playable by humans, so I can actually have people interpreting that music. And then it offers a lot of control, and we've been working really hard on making it controllable. And I can go on and explain why that is the case, but it's mostly because of our back and forth and exploration with musicians themselves and with software companies that make software for musicians that we felt that there needed to be more addition to this model before we release it publicly. And now it's available on Hugging Face, and there's been some good updates.
So you could you harmonize a melody, for instance?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you can be like, hey, this is a melody, make me a polyphonic piano part, or an organ or a guitar, and then a bass line and a drum for it. Yeah, no problem.
Is it restricted in terms of how many bars you could input or output?
No, the model itself has an attention window, and we have different versions depending on, but we like it to run on a CPU. So the current model that works everywhere has about 16 bar to 32 bars of attention. And what it will do is there's a windowing mechanism. So if I load, a song from Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, and I resample the entire bass line, then it's going to go and slide through like that. Yeah. Yeah. And an idea by prompting the system with music was that artists are in the business of making music, and often they have their own musical material. And explaining in text what style you want and all of the detail of what you want is actually really hard to do. And there's now a lot of studies showing that text prompting is not necessarily a great human-computer interface in a number of domains. And so we tried this alternative, in which you use the music material itself as part of the prompt. Yeah.
It's often a lot easier to come up with a great idea than to continue it or finish it. So it might be a good companion in that sense. So I have this project with a few music students where we do a kind of a hackathon because I teach a subject in composition and arranging. And their task is to try to cheat on these assignments using AI tools. So could you imagine using MIDI-GPT to cheat on an assignment? For instance, making a AABA jazz song in that format. Could you use MIDI-GPT for that purpose, you think?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. You can use MIDI-GPT on any composition assignments. And yeah, and so that's really entering, the realm of computer assisted creativity. And that's one of the reasons why we like the idea that, of course, with MIDI-GPT, you can generate from scratch. But if you generate from scratch, this system is trained on a dataset called MetaMIDI, which we also released at the Metacreation Lab. And it's the largest dataset of MIDI data in the world. It's at the moment 1.6 million MIDI track with the multi-track pieces of MIDI. And so it knows all of the music, every music. It knows way more music than a human can. And so if you generate from scratch, you might end up with like medieval classical music, right? And even if you can tell the system, oh, I want a pop song with like four instruments and this and that, like describing in word again with text is so difficult to get it right. And a lot of the system out there, and AI is for the most part a for-profit Californian enterprise, right? You can name, software that people use are not typically from Europe or anywhere else than the US or China. You get the Asian stack and the American stack, and those systems they're made for the layman and they're made for everyone to use, but therefore they're really not specialized. In other words, the system that we hear about them because of the massive PR machine of those big companies. And those big companies, they want to have everyone as a user, like for ChatGPT. So Udio, Suno, those prompt-based systems, they're great. And we can't remove that from them. They do work. But at the same time, if you're a musician and you have a specific idea of the aesthetic you want, you typically will never get there with those systems, right? You will have to adjust that prompt, change things over and over and over until you get what you want. So we took the reverse approach, which is like, no, a musician has music. That music is actually telling what style it is. It's telling, the density of notes, the size of notes. It's telling even the micro timing of the interpretation, the velocity that is used, the dynamic, all of those things that you would be well hard pressed, to describe with words. All of that is actually given by the fact that I don't want you to start from scratch. I want you to start from your music or someone else's music. If you're less of a, if ethics isn't less of a problem for you, you do what you want, right? But the truth is, by prompting with music, we find that we go way faster to the actual content that the creator is looking at and wants to listen to. And then we work more on, hey, what are the new features that no software has? Like things like batch generation. Hey, I want to make a variation of this. And a lot of professional musicians, Steinar, you probably know that, they do pastiche, they do style imitation, they do what my algorithm does for a living. They receive, a call from BBC on Monday. There is this documentary. It's going into 64 countries. You need to remake the soundtrack because we're not going to pay rights for all those countries. And so a lot of musicians, they do for a living music style imitation. And so the system would really allow them to take that track, we're going to resample half of the bars of the entire music piece on all of the track except for the drum, and we're going to do that 60 times or 100 times or 200 times. And now I want you to rank all those generations based on their proximity to the original. I listen to them one by one, and as soon as it sounds far enough from the original to be different, but with a good style that I'm interested in, I'll take that and I start working on it. Use cases like that are real use cases actually, is really what we were aiming for from the get-go. Being musicians ourselves in the lab, we really believe in my lab, which is a bit different from a lot of computer science department and labs that I know. We believe in participatory design. So this idea that when we design a system, and it starts by designing an algorithm, we want the end user to be there in the room. And to do that, we work with artists ourselves, second person, view on the system. And we work ourselves as artists, first person view on the system And that's important to us. And I think that's what allows us to design a little bit different type of systems. And so far, in our interaction with the industry, it's been quite successful and fruitful, because I think the industry understands that what we're looking at and what we actually need for real creators that make a living out of making music is different from what Californian AI has to offer, and how generic the tools are, and how we need things that are a bit more specialized. And so that's really the direction we took, and how we went that way.
Of course, professional musicians look after entirely different things and entirely different level of detail in their workflows. Have you been surprised by any feedbacks you've received from the users this far?
Yeah, well, we've been really happy. There's been albums made. There's all sorts of projects ongoing and past with it. We qualified for the finale of the AI Song Contest last year, and there was some of my students on stage during that presentation. And so we've been really happy to see that there's actual real world artistic application of the systems. In AI, very, very often we make the work with graduate students, we publish it, and then it's ending up on a shelf. Or even more often, then Google, Facebook, Meta, all of those companies would take it on, develop it, and then push something, and then the world will discover it then, right? So we move to a world where things have changed a lot in terms of research, because before the GAFA, the best in any domain, especially computer science and the type of things we do in AI, the best would always be a professor and his or her PhD students. And nowadays, we have a number of companies that for some reason is still unclear, and there's still conversation around it, started doing research and started publishing in the same place where my students publish, right? Except that when they publish their paper, they have 1.4 billion followers. Let's say if you say Google, for example. So it doesn't matter if the paper is good or bad or new or not new. The world is going to take it for, hey, this is the first time, this is the first people doing that, and those are the best, and etc. etc. Turns out 3 years earlier, maybe my student came up with a way better algorithm for the same thing, and they've been, copying it, improving it through engineering, and then publishing it. And it's very often the case like that. So the world has really changed, and often my students say that it's unfair, because there's a big difference between doing the same work in my lab and doing the work as an intern in Google. The visibility of the work would be the same, but the visibility of the work would be completely different. And so there's been, not just in research, but of course in the software industry and in application, there's been a very big asymmetry of information and power. Because a lot of those companies, are so big that they sort of put everything else in the shade, and then it's really hard to exist, outside of the realm of those very big players. And so that's something that we've been trying to do and work on with our little ecosystem here, that involve both artists and communities that are hybrid, basically, like the AIMC conference, the AI Music Creativity Conference, which will be in Belgium in September this year. It was at Oxford last year. It will be in Berlin next year. And then we're looking after that, maybe moving it to North America. And that's the type of conference in which we have a mix of academics and actual musicians and composers that take their time and work together on tools. And in those forums that I attend and I help animate, there is a strong critique of the mainstream AI and what the GAFA are doing and the way they are doing it.
I guess that's a bit like the rest of the world in terms of visibility and influence being the currency. That's how it's like for artists, or influencers kind of rule the world in that way.
Yeah.
So if you have a big following,
the attention economy is also a reality in research now, and that's very new. And even when I apply for grants, it used to be that what matters was excellence and the quality of the work. Now they have all those measures called impact, not just the citations, like which is the normal regular type of impact we used to measure in academia, but now it's like how many followers do you have, and how many people have downloaded or tried your software. And if I give a demo software for people to try, it's going to be hard for me to compete with Google. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
Google, they're gonna put it on the front page of their search engine, and it's gonna be really hard to exist that way. And so yeah, the ecosystem is rapidly changing, but I'm always one to try uh, to reaffirm the fact that there is a real diversity. And I'm not saying that what the GAFA are doing is not good nor useless. You know, it's having generic agents and generic tools that you can prompt is really useful for a lot of people, including myself. But there's also a space in which, for professionals, for experts, there's different types of tools that needs to exist, and those tools won't have billions of users because there's not, millions of people who actually want to compose music from the ground up. And so those big companies have no interest to serve those niche markets. There's not enough money basically for them to go there.
Mm.
And so, there's a real space there of opportunity for people like you and I, to exist and to do interesting things.
In the world of AI and music these days, if we kind of look past the major commercial players, um, who are the most interesting guys at the moment, do you think? What kind of communities or institutions, or who's making the coolest stuff right now?
Well, there's it's mostly happening. I think I feel in the academic world. So you get different poles. You get IRCAM in Paris, who has always done really interesting things, and they continue doing it. I work with Jérôme Nica right now because we have also a thread of work in my lab on musical agents, and that again it has never been, and so far is not, a mainstream activity, and therefore uh, it's been very very active and very interesting, but there's been none of the GAFA presence in that space. Although Google just released a paper inspired by some of our work using transformers for musical agents, but uh, but yes, there is the academic world. There's Queen Mary in London, which is possibly the main center for computer music and anything music and computing and AI related. Is the largest concentration on Earth. And then there is, humbly on our side, the Metacreation Lab, where we're doing also pretty well, and a few others. And so we gather in those communities such as AIMC. There's NIME, the New Interface for Musical Expression, is a conference that is about more human machine interactions and how to design that in the context of what's happening right now with music, musical tools, and AI. And there's plenty of other conferences, and that's really where we live. I also like to have a public-facing part of the work at the lab. So we do play music ourselves. I will be playing at Mutech Festival this year in um, in Montreal at the end of August. It's the largest electronic music festival in Canada, and we're really happy. We'll be playing a piece called Revival, in which we, in a sort of cheeky way, we train musical agents on the music of dead composers, and we explore this idea of digital afterlife, but for music composition.
Hmm.
It's very trendy. There's a lot of companies now making agents that are going to survive you and learn from your data and all that. So we're interested in exploring those concepts, but in the context of music. Concretely, I always wanted to play with David Tudor. He's dead, so I'm going to make an AI agent of him, for example, right, and play on stage with an agent that has learned from the material of those dead musicians, both the sound material, but also the temporal dynamic. And those agents are capable of, on stage in live situation, reason and be like, oh, given what Steinhardt just played and what Philippe just played and what I just played, what should I play next to sound like David Tudor, right? So those type of style imitation in live on stage, we present that. But that's really what we try to do, is to link the academic community with then an audience and then the artistic community, and try to serve those communities the best we can, because we are in a way part of those communities ourselves, right? And so we feel
Mhm.
really we feel that we're sincere in our effort.
Hmm.
And then we work with companies. Steinhardt. We work with Steinberg. It's been a number of years that they're funding our research. But so far, nothing with Steinberg, with teenage engineering, with um, audio kinetics in Montreal. No product have been released. And that has to do more so with the fact that all of our systems are data driven. And when we talk about MIDI-GPT, so it's trained on MetaMIDI, and MetaMIDI is acquired because I'm a researcher and under fair use in Canada. For research purposes, I can scrap the internet, right? There's no way I would have gotten so many MIDI files otherwise. And then it used to be that you scrap the internet to make a data set, you train a model, the model doesn't have the data. If it's not um, if it's trained properly, it's not memorizing the data, and it generates things that I can show are not plagiarizing the data. And we show that, of course, because the company would not even consider the model otherwise. And then it used to be the case that they can pack the model and sell it. And there's still a number of companies doing that, like Suno, Udio. And now you have an ecosystem with two types of players. Players who are either very big, like the GAFA, or like Suno or Udio, uh, smaller players that just do AI. And so for them, it's a break it or make it sort of game. And they get lawsuits, and we see what's going to happen. I'm actually a witness expert in the federal court in the US on some of those cases, so I can't talk too much about it. But there's those companies who will try it, So they have one product, and this product is based on AI. So they're going to try all their best. Maybe they're going to get sued. Maybe they win. Maybe they lose. And then you have companies I work with, like Teen Engineering or like Steinberg. They have plenty products. Cubase has 1 million license and hundreds of functionalities. They don't want to damage their reputation and to take a risk of losing everything because of one AI feature. No matter how good that AI feature is, right? And so for those guys, and there's a lot of companies in the world like that in every domain, they're just waiting to see what the legislation is going to really look like and how it's going to be applied. And it's been a real pity that our legislators, governance in general in the world is a little bit broken, but in this particular case, that it has been so slow to move, and therefore the GAFA and all the people who are much more like, we do this and that's all we do, we can take the risk, got such a lead in that adventure that it's very complicated now for regular software company who existed before this AI craze, where it's really hard for them to push those products. And there's still, in a way, all of the company I work with, we do the research together. We're still preparing things in the background. We're testing things. We're refining designs, but they can't release anything because the legal team is like, this is not an ecosystem in which we want to take that risk. So that's where we are at right now with, some of the divide between what people are exposed to, typically Californian AI, and what's actually existing all across the world, not just here in Canada, but also in Europe. That's why it's hard for people to name AI and software coming from Europe, because they don't really exist commercially for the most part.
So there was a lot of stuff to unpack in what you just said. Among other things, you mentioned that you wanted to train an AI agent on a dead artist. That kind of raises some ethical questions. And you're also talking about all the pending lawsuits and slow legislation. And I'm wondering, both when it comes to the ethical viewpoint on using dead musicians' music as a training set, how do you feel that fits into your ethical view of fair use?
Yeah, well, exactly. And we do it in an artistic context because it's provocative. It's obvious that we won't do it with Beyonce or Michael Jackson, because first, Beyonce is not dead, but Michael Jackson is dead. We won't do it on Michael Jackson because we probably would get sued real quick. And yeah. On the ethical side, of course, this is really to have that discourse that we also make that type of artworks, because we do believe that the question of the digital afterlife is a real one, and then increasingly our digital footprint, you want it or not, is increasing because everything we do is computer mediated. And so there is already the case that Facebook exploits your data while you're alive, and guess what? They'll continue exploiting your data when you're dead, and you're not going to be removed from their database, and etc. etc. So, want it or not, this question, is a very very a very very um, current one. And so with this artwork in particular, we really put that to the forefront by being explicit and saying, hey, this is what we're doing. But then I can link it to a lot of things that are already been done without people being explicit about it, right? So that's bringing the discourse forward. Then concretely and a bit more technically, in terms of ethics, well, we can, in some case, get the rights of the stakeholders, of people who have inherited the rights of those composers. In some cases, the work is in public domain, right? So, for example, I'm training AI on some Wagnerian music, some music from Wagner. He died more than 70 years ago. And so in most legislations, there's differences between countries, which is another thing with those type of notions, which is quite incredible, is that, regulating AI is hard, but regulating AI in a world that doesn't have, unfortunately, the capacity to do worldwide regulation that are concerted and harmonized, is sort of the dramatic situation we're in. And so this is also another part of the conversation we want to have is, where you train that model, where are the servers, where is the data? All of that will change completely the legal status of what we do. And then when it comes to the ethics, there's other questions such as the legitimacy of the work. So a lot of the arguments of companies defending themselves, being attacked in justice right now for scrapping data from the internet, they say, well, every music is a socially constructed phenomena, right? No human will be born on an island alone and end up with composing a symphony in their lifetime, right? We are musicians and we do what we do because there was musicians before us doing what they do, and we are inspired by it, right? And I can listen to the radio, get inspired by a piece, and write a piece that is sort of related but different. How is that different from my neural network listening to the radio, except all of the radio very, very quickly? In other words, eating all that data, getting inspired by it, and generating something that is arguably not, in that case, if I imitate the work of David Tudor, that is not the work of David Tudor, that is original, that there's no copyright issue, but it's been inspired by the work of David Tudor. What is ethically wrong with that? This seems to be what humans are actually doing, right? And so we want to go a little bit deeper into that discourse whereby right now, and because people are afraid and scared, and it's true because some people are getting sued, some companies are getting sued. So everyone is like, ooh, if you use data, if it's not your data, then you probably shouldn't. But the truth is then that starts a new war, which is who can afford data, right? And if it is the case that you need to be able, like big American company, to afford entire catalog of music and pay a massive amount of money to be able to train and eventually use and exploit those models, then again you create another type of inequality, which is inequality to access to data, right? Or you see, so we do that in an artistic context because we think it's harmless, right? It's not like the family of David Tudor is making a fortune and they're gonna sue us. We love the aesthetic, we're earnest in our approach. We really think it's a strong art project and the output is really, really good. It has obviously nothing to do with the actual work of the artist itself. It's our work, but part of it is that we use that data. And so we do that consciously, and it's part of our practice and our process, and it's also triggering discussions, right? And that's why we do it. But so far, at least, I looked at every angle of it, and I've not been, proven guilty of anything unethical that I know of.
What would be the counter argument, you think, if you were to play devil's advocate?
I think there's plenty. You know, some of them would be cultural. There's cultures in which, for example, pictures of dead people are not okay, right? Even for memory purposes or something like that. There's religions like the Muslim religion, which is, you know, the fastest growing ideology on earth, and the second largest ideology after the Christian one, religion. And so in that religion, for example, explicit representation of human figures is not okay, right? So there's the status of data, depending on cultures, depending on the way death is being treated, depending on the way remembrance is being treated, depending on the definition of respect that you have, the status of data of deceased people, you know, would be vastly different, right? The concrete thing, though, is right now, uh, nobody read them when they sign the agreement, you know, but when you open your Facebook account, your Instagram account, your TikTok account, your Google account, you give the entirety of the data of the interaction you will have with those platforms ad infinitum, right? So you sell your afterlife, your digital afterlife by definition, like by, you know, you literally sign on it when you sign in. And so again, you know, this artwork is a way to also raise awareness to that, because typically people don't think about that. It's not really pleasant to think about one's death. It's not really present to think about databases with our own data in it, and mixing the two is not something people think about on a daily basis. People are really busy
Mm.
with the present, you know, their immediate future and maybe their immediate past, but they rarely think about, hey, what's going to happen to all of that in 50 years, right?
Mm. So it's probably a good market idea to make a halal Facebook or something.
I think there's gonna be, yeah, absolutely. I think there's gonna be some platform as those conversations evolve that are gonna start being explicit about
Mm.
exactly that, about talking about what's happening, right?
But you mentioned also that the way humans learn and make music is community driven or socially driven, and the way we learn is similar to a neural network. And yeah, that's a common argument when it comes to defending these lawsuits. But do you have any opinions on how AI music legislation should look like? Do you think it should be like completely open, or should there be any boundaries?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a complex question, and the response, you know, I want to be a little bit nuanced here, but the answer is that it depends. But there is surely something to be said about the protection of intellectual property, and you know, it's almost like um, a political view that people take on it, you know, from people that are extremely copyleft, aka copyright is a wrong thing, we should not bother with it, to people that are you know, typically you move toward corporations that are extremely copyright oriented with like massive legal instruments to defend those copyrights. And right now, all of the lawsuits that I know of, most, no, not all, most of the lawsuits that I know of in the US and in Canada have to do with big stakeholders attacking AI companies. And so it's Universal, it's Sony, it's really big stakeholders attacking AI companies because of the monetary dimension of it. Sometimes, more rarely, it is artists themselves, right? And I'm more interested in those cases because I think it's more earnest. It's less of a game of money then. And I know personally some artists, visual artists, painters that used to make a living painting uh, portraits that people would ask them to make of themselves, and then they can't earn a living now because now you can do, you know, image to image with a few prompts and get a really good portrait of you. Of course, it's not made of oil painting on a canvas, so it's actually completely different, but it
Mm.
looks really great. You get to steer the system towards something you like, and it's sort of flattering and that. And so there's a real impact of those generative AI systems on the market. In France, for example, 35% of the market for graphic design has been eaten by those systems. And so there's
Mm.
literally 35% less money to go around if you're a graphic designer in France. And so a lot of young graphic designers can't make it anymore. So the impact on job displacement and all that is already real of all those systems. So legislation and some protection, at least in the short term, I think is the right way to go. And but then we need the right tools, right? How, as an artist, can I really decide to give my data and make sure that I'm going to be paid for it? Or how can I make sure that I decide not to give my data and then no one can actually pump it? No one can scrap it. So technically, we're not quite there yet. In terms of legislation, we're not quite there yet. But there is those niche market appearing. Some companies, for example, Adobe, are already doing the right thing. Like Adobe, because they own, I think it's called with Firefly, they have Giphy. They have the largest stock pictures site in the world, and they let every creator on that stock picture site decide if they allow their data to be used to train AI or not. And if they do, then a little stream of money will come back each time the model is being used. And so those new systems to retribute, so to clear, how would you call that? To make sure that the artist is on board and then to retribute and pay back the artist. Those systems already exist. You know, some companies are going that road and stuff. But here again, it takes a massive infrastructure and I'm afraid that only big companies can afford to go that road for now. And so we need, and that's something we work very hard on in Canada, we need what we call AI commons. So we need clear regulations, but we also need AI command, that is tools and approaches that allow common people to either sell the data or protect the data, or to manipulate and do that without having a team of engineers and legal experts at hand. And that last mile of some companies are doing the right thing to everyone is in a position to be able to work and at the same time do the right thing. We're not there yet. So there's quite a bit of work. And so in Canada, we are trying to work towards AI commands and look at the picture in a holistic fashion and say, hey, AI, the internet, and the digital is just an infrastructure. And infrastructures are commons. Roads aren't private, they're public. The mailing system, the post system, Post Canada is public. And we should have an equivalent for AI. And if we do, then it means we would have, places to store data, all sort of things, will happen that are not the case now. Because it would be a public infrastructure, that would follow the laws sort of by definition. And then that way, that will empower people to either offer the data or protect the data, and with some sort of guarantee, because professional computer scientists would run public servers to do that. So that's one of the potential future that I can see in terms of untangling and trying to answer all those complex questions, is to go back to basically considering the internet, AI, and our digital information as part of being managed by public services. It used to be the case in France before the internet that we had the Minitel, which was a French situation in which everyone had a terminal. It was using the telephone lines at the time. And you would have access to a network. It's the internet. It was an internet of the time. Different network would be linked together. And then there was this idea that you would rent it from the post office, and then the servers would be at the city level or at the department or even at the state level. And then only computer scientists would work on those servers. And so the software will always work, and you don't have to install anything. And right now we're back to that model, which is a decentralized model where you have, client server and everything is in the cloud, except that the cloud is not public, it's private, right? And so we're already in a situation where if every communication and every action we do is digitally mediated, well, those infrastructure we use they're all private. And so all of a sudden, by the very fact of using them, the data escape you, and the future of those data and your behavior, everything is being logged, obviously, and everything except you, because everything becomes all of a sudden preempted by the private industry, right? So without digressing too much, which I love to do from your question, Steinar, there is here what I want to just do is point at a vision that it has not always been the way it is right now, and there is nothing saying that it should be in the future the way it is right now. But the way it is right now benefits a few very big companies and no one else really.
Mm. So you're saying that the digital infrastructure and cloud services should be publicly owned or governed by the state or something like that?
Absolutely, absolutely. There should be, and there is like right now a big movement in most countries to renationalize a lot of things. And I think the digital infrastructure is one of those things that people are now being increasingly worried about. Yes, because it's almost impossible to live without Californian AI, and it's almost impossible to enter the market and propose an alternative, right? And so those two facts together are a little bit problematic, especially in the geopolitical context in which we are entering, right?
Yeah. So there's lots of stuff to dig into there. I was also thinking about, since you mentioned that 35% of the market for graphic designers in France had been eaten up by AI. Or do you see anything similar happening with tools like MIDI-GPT? You mentioned earlier that that you could use it in sort of a workflow as a film music composer could, in terms of imitating styles and doing that more efficiently. Could that also take away some of the market opportunities?
Well, possibly, but I don't think so. And we really took care of trying to design MIDI-GPT in a way whereby it's an assistant to the artist, but it's not a way to replace the artist, right? With Suno Audio, you can, without knowing nothing, from scratch, generate a great track in 30 seconds. But with MIDI-GPT, you need to know what to start with, and then the granularity at which it works. There's so much, because of all those controls, so much parameters and things. You have to work, like it's work, and it's a tool you have to learn how to know and learn how to use. And some people get good at it and or not. But in other words, with our systems, you cannot completely remove the human of the loop. And that's something that is important to us, to make sure that eventually the creator stay being the human, and eventually we do computer assisted creativity, and or even co-creation, where we can sometimes acknowledge, hey, the system has part into this composition. And in fact, we did studies around that because we're really interested, both for beginners and for professional, what are the difference, what's at stake, and how do they use the system. And we find that indeed they use it very differently. When we work with Ableton or Steinberg, in this case, the studies take place in Cubase. A beginner, typically their problem is that they bought a music software and they want to make music, but they never finished a track. They don't know really how to do it. And often those music software, especially in music, are aspirational purchase, where people buy Ableton because they want to make electronic music. The 6 million Ableton license, I guarantee you 95% of those license, they never finished a track. Right? So by putting something like MIDI-GPT in their hands, they will start, maybe make a melody, maybe they can generate the rest. They can also then generate things that they like, but that would not be able to compose anyway. And by steering the system, and that's where the balance of control, the one button generate versus like all of the control being explicitly shown. Beginners get lost if there's too much control. Professionals are annoyed if there's not enough control. So this balance is always really hard in any software to strike. But by manipulating and steering the system, if we do it well and if we give them the right control, they can compose music that they like, because they become the curator and the system becomes the composer. And they have this little assistant that does what they want, and they can converge, and we have evidence of that, to music that they like, that they could not compose otherwise. So for beginners, and that's really the vast majority of the market that those companies we work with would want to eat, is that they want their beginners to be able to become, in a way, composers. The composers themselves, the professionals, those guys, they know how to make music. They don't even need the system, right? And when we study with those professionals, and in that study, it was published at ISHCAI last year, the International Joint Conference on AI, we define professional by people who actually make a living out of using Cubase. So really, there's a direct link between this use of Cubase, this software, and their livelihood. And then we put this new AI system in it. And for them, it's really scary. It's been 30 years because Cubase is an old software that they use and compose in Cubase. And also then you put a machine that is almost competing with them potentially inside their favorite software. And then we observe what happens. And what we find is for composers, they actually love it, but they don't really use the output of the system at all. Unlike the beginners who would verbatim, use the output of the system, the composers would be more like, what if I put a marimba here? Give me 3 examples. Oh yeah, I like that. I'll work with that. And then they start composing a part because they can, because that's what they do. Usually some of them were even surprised when we asked if they use they were like, of course I'm not going to use the content of the system. That's not my content, right? But I'm interested to generate and try. And so they do what if scenario, right? So you see that 2 different population of users, 2 completely different way of using it with 2 complete different outcomes. And so we are interested in that, not just generating with MIDI-GPT the best algorithm for music composition, but also how to integrate them in existing workflows and software, and then studying not just usability, does the system work, or is the interface the right interface, which we do, of course, usability studies, but more importantly, we're interested in authorship. At the end, do you feel this is your music that you made with ChatGPT or with MIDI-GPT in this case? Or is it the machine music and you've been, directing the machine and it's good music, but it's not your music? Or is it really your music and the machine was just an assistant? Or is it a collaboration? Right? What is the status of that music? And even more importantly, in our experiments, we also look at what we call the phenomenological aspect of using those software. In other words, how do you feel? So if you've been using Cubase for 20 years and you come and now there's this new system and you sort of have to use it because you compose faster with it, how do you feel in the morning? Do you feel like, oh no, do you feel like this is really ruining your work, which is like the passion of your life? Or do you feel like you're still excited, and using it? So we really try to go deeper than just, this is a toy, use it and tell me that it's amazing. No, I think in Gen AI, we need to pass this sort of, flamboyant, just quick demo of like, oh my God, look what it does. It does a little video that moves like that. But yeah, but I can't use that video anywhere because it's totally not my aesthetic and I can't get it to do what I want. Well, it's just a toy. We're trying to build actual tools and to really study what are the implications of those tools.
Excellent. I think that was a great finishing statement for this episode, actually, Philippe.
Thank you, Stena.
So, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And sorry for digressing in my answers. I like to not really answer questions. I like more to put out provocating thoughts. I hope you're